The morning Naomi Chen walked into Hargrove Capital's marble lobby, she was carrying a tote bag from a grocery store and wearing shoes that had seen better days. Nobody looked twice at her. That was the point. She had learned a long time ago that the way people treat you when they think you have nothing tells you everything you need to know about who they really are. It was a lesson her father had taught her, standing in a laundromat in Fresno when she was 9 years old, watching a landlord speak to her mother like she wasn't worth the air she was breathing. Her father had said nothing, he'd just watched. And later, when that same landlord came begging for an extension on a loan, her father had remembered every word. Naomi had never forgotten that either. She crossed the lobby toward the reception desk, her tote bag over one shoulder, a paper coffee cup in her hand. The cup was from a gas station down the street. She had bought it deliberately. The young man behind the desk didn't look up when she approached. She waited. He typed something, clicked something, then finally glanced up with the expression of someone who had already decided the conversation wasn't worth his full attention. "Can I help you? I have a 9 o'clock, Naomi said. He looked at his screen. Name Chen. A pause. A longer pause than necessary. I don't see a Chen on the schedule. Try Naomi. He typed slowly with 2 fingers like he was doing her a favor. I'm not seeing anything. Are you sure you have the right building? She looked at him steadily. I'm sure. Well, he leaned back slightly, as if creating distance was a professional skill. You're welcome to take a seat, and I'll let someone know you're here. But our executive floor is by appointment only, and if you're not in the system, I'll wait, she said. She sat down on one of the low leather chairs near the window. The lobby smelled like money. That particular combination of fresh flowers, climate control, and something faintly cedar. She had smelled it in 100 buildings just like this one. She set her tote bag between her feet and looked out at the street. Across the lobby, 2 men in suits walked past her without a glance. A woman in heels clicked past, talking into her earpiece. A courier arrived, was immediately signed in, and disappeared into an elevator. Naomi watched all of it. She had been waiting 11 minutes when a woman in her late 20s came striding out of the elevator bank, phone in hand, scanning the lobby with the focused look of someone who had been sent to find something specific and was mildly annoyed about it. She stopped when she saw Naomi. Chen, that's me. The woman blinked, recalibrated, and said, I'm sorry for the confusion. I'm Priya, Mr. Dunbar's assistant. He's ready for you. I apologize, we weren't told to expect you this way. This way, Naomi asked pleasantly. Priya's cheeks went slightly pink. Through the main entrance. We usually have our guests come through the executive arrival on the north side. I know, Naomi said. I wanted to see the main entrance. She picked up her tote bag and followed Priya to the elevator. The 52nd floor of Hargrove Capital was exactly what the lobby promised. Glass and steel and the kind of purposeful calm that costs a great deal of money to manufacture. Naomi had been in this building exactly once before 18 months ago when she had signed the paperwork that made her the silent co-founder of the firm she was about to walk into a meeting about. Silent, that had been her choice. At the time it had seemed like the right one. She had been 3 years into building Tessera Group, her own asset management company, and she hadn't wanted the distraction of a public profile at a second venture. She had wanted to invest quietly, let the right people run the day-to-day, and see what happened. What happened was that the right people had turned out to be the wrong people. Not all of them, just the one who mattered most. Priya led her down a long hallway lined with abstract art, the kind that costs more than most people's annual salary and communicates nothing except that someone spent money on it. At the end of the hallway was a set of glass doors, and beyond them a conference room where 5 people were already seated around a long table. At the head of the table sat Preston Dunbar. He was 53, silver-haired, and had the look of a man who had spent decades being the most important person in any room he entered. When Naomi came through the doors, he rose halfway from his chair, smiled broadly, and gestured to the seat at the far end of the table, the seat facing him, as if he were granting her an audience. Mrs. Chen, he said warmly, so glad you could make it. Naomi set her tote bag down on the table. Not on the chair beside her, on the table. She saw 2 of the 5 people exchange a glance. Preston, she said. Thank you for rescheduling. Of course. He settled back into his chair, though I have to say your office was a little cryptic about the reason for the meeting. We weren't sure what to prepare. You didn't need to prepare anything, she said. This isn't that kind of meeting. She reached into the tote bag and set a manila folder on the table. Preston looked at it, then at her. His smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. I've been reviewing the Q3 allocations, Naomi said, and the restructuring from August. The restructuring was a necessary step. It moved $42 million in capital away from the community investment portfolio, she said, into leveraged positions that were not disclosed to the full board. I know because I am on the full board and nobody disclosed them to me. The room went very quiet. A man on Preston's left, a partner named Hugh, whose last name Naomi had already looked up, along with his professional history, his wife's name, and the details of 2 previous SEC inquiries that had been quietly settled, cleared his throat. Chen, I think there may have been a communication breakdown. There was no communication breakdown, she said. There was a decision made to keep me uninformed. Those are different things. Preston's smile had faded now. He folded his hands on the table. I understand you have concerns, and I want to assure you, everything we've done has been in the best interest of the firm's long term. I'm not here for assurances, Naomi said. I'm here to tell you that I've retained outside counsel and that I'll be requesting a full audit of all capital movements since January 1st. The request is already filed. The room moved then, small, involuntary movements, people shifting in chairs, someone reaching for a phone. Preston's face had gone still in the way that faces go still when the person inside is recalculating very quickly. Naomi waited. That's an extraordinary step, Preston said carefully. So was moving $42 million without board disclosure, she said. She had not always been this precise. There had been years, long ones, in her late 20s when she had believed that being smart and working hard and trying to be fair to people would be enough. She had built the early version of Tessera from a desk in a shared office space in Chicago, with 2 employees and a client list she kept in a spiral notebook because the software subscription felt like an extravagance she couldn't afford. She had stayed up until 2 in the morning, reading about municipal bonds and agricultural credit markets and everything in between, because she had decided that if she was going to do this, she was going to actually understand it. She had grown up watching her parents manage money with the careful anxiety of people who knew what it felt like to not have enough. Her mother kept a notepad in the kitchen where she tracked every expense. Her father worked 2 jobs for most of her childhood and never talked about it like it was a sacrifice. Just a fact. They had not been wealthy, but they had been meticulous. And they had taught her that money, managed carefully and honestly, was one of the few tools that could actually change things. That was what Tessera was supposed to be, what she had always intended it to be. It had taken her 8 years and a great deal of the kind of luck that looks like bad luck until it doesn't. A partnership that collapsed and forced her to restructure in a way that turned out to be smarter. A client who pulled out at the last minute and whose departure freed her to take a risk she wouldn't have taken otherwise, to build Tessera into something real. By the time she co-founded Hargrove Capital as a silent partner, Tessera managed over $400 million in assets, and most of the people who knew her name thought of her as a serious person with a quiet profile and a strong track record. The quiet profile was a choice. She had made it because she had watched other women in her field become stories before they became professionals. She had watched them get profiled for their clothing and their marriages and their personal lives, and she had decided that she would keep herself small and specific until she had built something large enough that the story had to be about the work. And then she had kept doing it, partly out of habit and partly because she had genuinely come to prefer it. She liked being underestimated. She liked walking into rooms where nobody expected much from her, because those were the rooms where she got to do the most interesting work. The lobby this morning had been, in a small way, a test she ran on herself sometimes, to see if she still felt it, that particular mixture of indignation and patience that she had learned to hold together, to make sure she hadn't gotten so used to being treated well that she'd forgotten what the other thing felt like. She hadn't forgotten. The man she had been told to speak to before the meeting was named Eli Croft. She had not told anyone she was going to see him first. Eli worked on the 31st floor of a different building entirely, a smaller, older office on the west side, where Hargrove Capital's Community Development Division had been housed before the August restructuring had, among other things, quietly moved those operations to a shared space with 2 other departments and reduced the staff by 60%. She had found him through his work. He had been for 4 years the director of the Community Investment Program, the one that had been funding small business microloans in underserved neighborhoods across 6 cities, financial literacy programs in public schools, and a matched savings initiative that had helped over 3,000 families build emergency funds for the first time. The program that had, in the course of the August restructuring, been reduced to a line item. She had read Eli's memos going back 2 years. Every quarter, methodical and clear, laying out outcomes, challenges, and projections. He wrote without drama, without inflation, with the kind of careful precision that you rarely see in people who are also doing the work themselves. He cared about the numbers because he cared about what was behind them. She had not told him she was coming. He was at his desk when she knocked on the open door, a corner office that was now surrounded by empty chairs where his team used to sit. He looked up, and she saw him process her presence with a slight delay, the way people do when they're not expecting someone. "Miss Chen," he said. He stood. He was younger than she had expected. Early 30s, maybe, with the look of someone who had been doing serious work long enough that it showed in a good way. He was in a button-down shirt that had seen better mornings, and there were 3 open folders on his desk and a cold cup of coffee next to his keyboard. "Sit down," she said. "Please." He sat. She sat across from him. "I read your September memo," she said. "The one that wasn't distributed to the board." His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. "How did you? I requested everything from the last 18 months. They gave me most of it." She paused. The September memo wasn't in the original file. A copy came through separately. He was quiet for a moment. "I sent it to 3 board members directly," he said finally. "When I realized the restructuring was going forward regardless of the outcome data. None of them told me." "No," he said. "I don't think they would have." Naomi looked at the empty chairs surrounding his desk. "How many people were on your team?" 11. He said it without self-pity, which she appreciated. Just 11. That was how many? How many now? 3, including me. He picked up his coffee, realized it was cold, and set it back down. "We're still running the matched savings program, just the 2 original cities. The others were suspended. The school programs are on hold pending resource reallocation, which, in my experience, means they're done." Naomi looked at the folders on his desk. What would it take to restore them? He looked at her steadily. "You mean actually restore them? Not a pilot or a phased plan. I mean restore them." He took a breath. $8 million over 2 years to get back to full operating capacity in all 6 cities, another 2 for the schools. The infrastructure for the loan program would need to be rebuilt almost from scratch because we lost the 2 people who ran it and the systems they built. But it's possible. If the board authorizes it and doesn't reverse course in 6 months, he said, "Yes, it's possible." She nodded slowly. There was something she wanted to ask him, and she was deciding how to ask it. "Why did you stay?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a car horn sounded, 2 floors of city below them, filtering up through the glass. "Because 3 cities is better than none," he said. "And because I figured someone would eventually read the September memo. The audit took 4 months. Naomi did not rush it. Rushing it would have given Preston and the partners time to argue that it was punitive, personal, or imprecise. She wanted it to be none of those things. She wanted it to be the kind of work that couldn't be argued with. It was. The audit found 3 categories of concern. The first was the undisclosed capital movement, the $42 million, moved without full board approval into leveraged positions that had, it turned out, benefited 2 of the partners personally through a side vehicle that the audit described, in careful legal language, as representing a significant conflict of interest. The second was a pattern of reporting that had systematically minimized the community investment program's outcomes, presenting it to the board not as what it was, which was a performing portfolio of social impact assets with measurable returns, but as a cost center that was underperforming. Eli's memos, read in sequence alongside the official reporting, showed the discrepancy clearly. The third was smaller, but to Naomi not less important. 11 people, including program managers and community liaisons who had been doing excellent work and had been let go as part of a restructuring that was presented as a budget necessity, but was, in fact, a strategic choice made by 2 people who had authority they hadn't earned. Preston resigned in January. He did it quietly, through his attorneys, with a statement that cited a desire to pursue other opportunities. Naomi did not comment publicly. She had been advised to, and she had declined. The other partners restructured. 2 of them stayed. Hugh did not. Naomi was asked 3 times by 3 different journalists how she felt about the outcome. She said the same thing each time. The work speaks for itself. She meant the audit. She also meant Eli's memos. On a Thursday in March, 6 months after the audit concluded, Naomi sat in what had been Preston's corner office on the 52nd floor and went through the final staffing plan for the restored Community Investment Division. The office still had his art on the walls. She had not gotten around to changing it, and honestly, she found she didn't care much about the art. The plan called for rebuilding the team to 15 people, 4 more than the original 11, with 3 new hires who specialized in areas where the program had gaps, including a data analyst who could help make the outcomes reporting cleaner and more defensible in the future. Eli was staying as director. That had not been a question. What had been a question for a few weeks in February was whether he wanted to. She had asked him directly, in a conversation she had not scheduled through anyone's assistant, but had arranged by calling his cell phone herself, which she had gotten by asking Priya, who had been surprised by the request and then had given her the number without comment. He had said yes. She had said good. They had talked for 40 minutes about the matched savings program and about a partnership he had been trying to build with a credit union in Detroit before everything fell apart, and by the end of the conversation she had 3 pages of notes. Now she looked at the staffing plan and signed the last page. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do in early spring, tentative, gray-bright, the light neither here nor there. She thought about her mother's notepad in the kitchen, each expense written in pencil, because pencil could be erased when something changed. Everything could be erased when something changed. That was the point. You kept the record because you were paying attention, not because you expected it to stay the same. She put down her pen. There was a knock at the open door, and Eli leaned in, jacket on today, which she had learned meant he had a community partner meeting, with a folder under one arm and the expression of someone who had something to say but was going to ask first whether she was free. "You have a minute? Come in." He sat across from her, opened the folder, and slid 3 pages across the desk. "The Detroit Credit Union got back to us. They want to move forward. They can have an MOU ready by April 15th if we can confirm funding allocation." She looked at the pages. The projections were careful and realistic, the way his projections always were, not optimistic, not pessimistic, just honest. "Confirm it," she said. He nodded once, the way he always did when a decision was made that he'd been hoping for but hadn't assumed. Not relief exactly, more like steady. "One more thing," he said. She looked up. The school in Milwaukee called. The financial literacy program starts again in May. They moved fast once they heard the funding was confirmed. The teacher who ran it before is coming back. He paused. She wanted to know if anyone from the firm would come and talk to the students. Naomi looked at him. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd ask." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about the lobby, and the gas station coffee, and the young man at the desk who hadn't looked up, and all the rooms she had walked into where nobody had expected much from her. She thought about what it might mean to be a student in a Milwaukee classroom who was being told, by someone who showed up in person, that this mattered, not as a photo opportunity or a line in a press release, but just as a fact. "Tell her yes," Naomi said. Eli stood, gathered the folder, and headed for the door. He stopped at the threshold. "For what it's worth," he said, not quite turning around, "I did eventually read every board member's name on that filing 18 months ago, when you co-founded the firm." She said nothing. "I just thought," he stopped. "I thought someone should tell you that I knew you were paying attention. Even then." He left. Naomi turned back to the window. The city was still doing what cities do, moving, not waiting, carrying on with or without anyone's attention, and she sat with that for a moment before she reached for the next folder on her desk and kept going.